Hey, it's Miss V, the storyteller, and I am so excited today. I have a guest. Him and we talked a few weeks ago, and we just got along great. He has a great sense of humor, but he has an amazing story. His name is Terry Tucker, and he is a very nice and kind gentleman, but he has a sense of humor. You all know me. You have to have a sense of humor when it comes to me. So, with that said, Terry, please tell us about yourself.
Well, Miss V, thanks first of all for having me on your show. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to talking with you today. So, a little bit about me. I am the oldest of three boys. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. You can't tell this from looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall, and I
Oh,
played college basketball at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, despite having three knee surgeries in high school. When I graduated from the Citadel, I moved home to find a job. I was all set to make my mark on the world with my newly obtained business administration degree. And I look back now and realize how little I knew about business just because I had a degree. Fortunately, I was able to find my first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the
mm,
hamburger chain, in their marketing department. Unfortunately, I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer.
mm.
Professionally, as I said, it started out at Wendy's. Then I became a hospital administrator. And then I made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did when I was in law
Wow.
enforcement was I was a SWAT team hostage negotiator. After I got out of law enforcement, started my own school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball, became an author in 2020, but for the last 10 years have been battling a rare form of
Mm.
cancer. And then finally, my wife and I have been married for almost 30 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Wow. I love it. You have a colorful life. It's so colorful. But the one that I love was two that I love. The one that you said that I didn't know about was the SWAT team. I love that because you can go in and talk pure trash and they can't do anything but listen to you and do what you say. I love that. Oh, I am one of those people. I love those types of shows, when SWAT comes in and oh, I love it. But I'm not going to get on and start talking about that. But when I heard it, my heart was like, SWAT team, yes.
Yes.
So I know you listen to my podcast. We've talked, and I want to know what story resonated with you. What story, when you listened to it, you was like, we need to talk about that story.
It was the story about that you talked about of the importance of needing to listen to your body. And I want to talk about that with you.
Well, that was a very difficult story for me to share. It was hard. It took me a long time to share the story because it touched me so much. And if you haven't listened to it, my guess, if you haven't, I mean, my audience, if you haven't listened to it, it's called Please Listen to Your Body When It Talks. And basically, I was on my way to my best friend's house to celebrate her birthday, and my body was telling me you don't need to go, but I didn't listen. I really didn't listen to it because a couple of weeks prior to it, I had gone to the doctor. She had gave me some medication, and she was so, like, it's you're gonna get better. And I was so excited. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get better and I can do this. And the closer I got to her house, I thought, I just need to go to the bathroom. I'll be fine. But basically, when I got there, things got worse from the moment I got there until I was admitted into the hospital. And I was so upset. I was in the hospital for a week, and my body had been literally screaming at me and telling me something is wrong. Even the night that I went to the emergency room. My best friend came in and she asked me, do you want me to take you to the emergency room? And I told her no. But my body won. It said, you are going. And I went to the emergency room. From there, they took me to the hospital. From there, I was in a hospital for like a week. I had an abscess in my stomach. They had to drain it. It was horrible because the only person that I really knew there was my best friend. I owned that she was the only one and she had to work. So I wanted to get the story out. Finally, I got myself together. I got the story out because I want people to know the importance of how our body talks to us. It will let us know something is going on. And if you just listen, like I probably, if I had to listen, I probably would have gone to the doctor sooner and probably would have gotten some type of treatment of knowing what was going on faster. So, what did you think when you heard the story?
It reminded me of a couple stories in my life. I told you about when I graduated from college and my father was dying. And my father had end-stage breast cancer back in the
Mm,
1980s, and they really didn't know how to treat
wow.
that in men. But my dad knew he was sick for months. His nipple had
Mm,
inverted and things like that, and yet he never went to the doctor. And it ultimately cost him. I mean, fortunately, you got to the doctor, you got treatment, and you're here with us today. My dad died because he didn't listen to his body. He didn't go back, he didn't go to the doctor. Now, granted, and I'm not making an excuse for him, but my dad was of a generation where
mm,
men didn't go to the doctor. I mean, I think back on my whole childhood, growing up, even high school and things like that. I never remember my dad going to the doctor. I remember him being sick a couple times, but he just stayed at home. He had the flu or something like that. And then when he got better, he went back to work. But I never remember him ever going to the doctor. And I'll tell you, that scared the heck out of me. And
yeah.
every year I got a physical exam after that. I mean, I was young, I was healthy, there was nothing
Mhm.
wrong with me, but it scared me enough that I needed to make sure that I was listening to my body as well.
That's amazing you said that because if your father had have been a person, if you hadn't seen him get sick and die, you probably would have been like him and not go to the hospital and not go to the doctors because you didn't see him doing it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly my mother took us. I mentioned I had two brothers. I mean, we always went for when we needed to get shots or we needed a physical for to play sports or something like that. But other than that, I mean, pretty much when we got sick, whether it was a cold or the flu, we stayed at home. It was home
Mhm.
remedies that my mother had gotten from her mother and things like that. So it was listening to your body, but it was also more of a homeopathic type of treatment as opposed to let's go to the doctor and get a pill or get a shot or something like that.
Yeah, now that you mention it, growing up, we went to the doctor, of course, as children. But one of the things we didn't do, well, when we were younger, we did. We went to the dentist. But
Mm,
as we grew older, my parents, I don't know, well, my mom ended up being a single mom. So the dentist was not high on the list
yeah.
of places for us to go. So we didn't go to the dentist a lot. But then my dad, he came back around and he was like, okay, we're going to take you. He took all four of us to the dentist. But I find that because that wasn't the regular in my household, going to the dentist is something that I will push off because it wasn't something that I grew up with once I became a teenager into an adult, you know. So it's amazing how things that you do growing up, but when you turn like a certain age or you become a teenager, you kind of grow out of it, if it's not embedded in you. Like if we had to continue to go to the dentist all the time, most likely that would have been higher on my list. But because we weren't consistent, and it's still not high on my list, number one, because I don't like going. But number two is because it wasn't high on my list.
Yeah.
So, with your father passing and everything, did you have a story personally about yourself where your body was talking to you and you kind of pushed it aside and didn't listen?
Yes and no. I have been, as I mentioned, for the last 10 years battling this rare form of cancer. And I mentioned that I was a girls' high school basketball coach. Well, that's how my cancer presented. I had a callus that broke open on the bottom
Hmm.
of my foot, right below my third toe. And initially, I didn't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I made an appointment with a podiatrist, a foot doctor
Hmm.
friend of mine. And I went in to see him and he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you got a little cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he cut it
Hmm.
out and he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it. No dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us any concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I received a call from him. And as I mentioned, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having explaining to me what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming,
Mm.
until finally he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have an incredibly
Wow.
rare form of melanoma. And most people think of melanoma as, too much exposure to the sun
Hmm.
and it affects the melanin, the pigment in our skin. He said, this is a rare form, has nothing to do with sun damage or sun exposure, but it appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And there's an even rarer form of melanoma, just for education for your audience. It's a mucosal kind of melanoma that appears like in your nose or your mouth or something like that, but it's still melanoma. And as a result, he recommended I go be treated at MD Anderson Cancer Center, one of the best cancer hospitals probably in the country. And so I did. I had the bottom of my foot removed. I had all the lymph
Oh,
nodes in my
wow.
left groin removed. And then when I healed, my doctor put me on a weekly injection of a drug called interferon, because at the time, melanoma was pretty much a death sentence. They really didn't have any treatments or therapies to help you. So I got put on this interferon drug where I took a weekly injection. But the side effects of interferon, at least for me, were that it gave me severe flu-like symptoms for
Mm.
2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for 5 years. So imagine having the flu every week
Yeah.
for 5 years. And as I said, that wasn't a cure. That was, as my oncologist used to say, we're trying to kick the can down the road. And that started my odyssey through cancer.
Wow. That's a lot. That is a lot to go through. And you were saying that like a callus, and see, that is something that someone would most likely blow off.
Right.
Because I can honestly say, if I got a callus under my foot, that even though my body is telling me something is going on because the callus came up, of course, your body is showing you, I would probably blow it off, and say, okay, it's a callus, maybe I need to soak my feet in some Epsom salt, or, maybe I need to go on the internet and see how you get rid of them or whatever. But it would be something that I would blow off. And it is amazing to me. So when it wouldn't go away, that is the reason why you sought out to get it looked at, because it wouldn't go away.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I figured it was just I was on my feet too much. It wasn't anything I needed to worry about. My body would heal itself.
Hmm.
But when it didn't, and that little cyst that was in there was this rare form of cancer. And by that time, it had already spread to my lymph nodes in my groin. And, after I stopped the interferon, it came back in almost exactly the same spot on my foot. That was 2017. 2018, I had my left foot amputated. It worked its
Hmm.
way up my leg into my shin in 2019, two more surgeries. And then in 2020, an undiagnosed tumor kind of in my ankle area grew large enough that it fractured my tibia, my shin bone. And my only recourse right in the middle of the pandemic was to have my left leg amputated above the knee. And I also found out I had tumors in my lungs, which I am
Oh my
still being treated
goodness.
for.
Well, number one, I am so glad that you are still here.
You and
So
me
God,
both.
God really loves you because you've gone through a lot, but you're still here and you're not bitter. You don't seem bitter or angry. You just seem, I've been through a lot, but I'm here and I'm present and I'm grateful to be here. That's the feel that I get from you. But I have a question. When the cyst, at any point were you in any pain? You just saw the cyst? Were you in any pain? I'm trying to understand, because being that you brought it up, if anybody has a cyst, I want them to understand that it's not something that you should blow off, because it could be something minor, but it could be something major. So, did you have any pain with it?
I did. When the callus broke open, it kind of got, there were almost like, we all know what a callus is. It's kind of rough
Mhm.
and that. there were like ridges around the little opening that were there. And so when I would walk or I would run, it would be like, oh, that's painful. That hurts.
Okay.
And that, so yes, there was some pain associated with it. Not right away, because it took time for that skin to kind of grow up around where the wound was, where the opening was. And the other thing I found, and I never knew this, so when I had the initial surgery to remove the tumor, they left the wound open and they put what's called a wound vac on it. But the second surgery, where they removed all the lymph nodes in my groin, they put a skin graft. They took a piece of the
Oh,
skin from my thigh, my right thigh, and they grafted it onto the open wound. But the thing I didn't realize is the skin that we have on our hands and on our feet is different than all
mm-hmm.
the rest of the skin we have in our body. So that little piece from my thigh was not nearly as tough and
Mm.
pliable as the normal foot skin that I had. So I would constantly get this buildup of this callus, and my wife used to have to shave off that portion of it, because if it grew, if it grew too much, it was very painful to walk on. So, it was a constant maintenance effort on my wife's part to keep me from, being in pain when I was walking.
Well, listen, I want to know what is it? What was it? How did you find the strength to move forward and to just show up and just be happy? Because you seem like a very happy person. You don't seem as though you allowed that to pull you back. And you've gone through a lot. Now, I've gone through a lot in my life, but I can't say that it was all physical. It was a lot of mental trauma for me. But how did you just find the strength to just move beyond all of that pain and all of the surgeries and all of that?
I used what I call my 3 F's, and the F stand for faith, family, and friends. I've always had a very strong faith in God. And when I was on the interferon, when I was, having the flu every week for 5 years, there was a point where I felt like I was not living. I was just not dying. And there's a difference if you understand that. Living, we're out doing,
Existing.
we're engaged in life. I wasn't. I was just trying to hang on for the next day. And there was a point in time where I was like, all right, God, no, this is not living. Just
Mm.
take me. Just get me out of here. Now, I want your audience to understand, I never contemplated suicide or anything like that, but I certainly wanted God to relieve me of this problem. And he didn't. But what I think he did was give me the strength to go on. And I remember when I got cancer, people were like, well, who do you blame? I'm like, what do you mean? Who do I
Mm.
blame? It's like, well, you've got to blame somebody. We're great in the United States of, people start down their road toward a goal and then they butt up against an impediment. Something gets in their way and they can't get over it or around it or through it. And so they quit. But we don't quit. We got to blame somebody because of that. We got to
Yes.
blame our parents or, our station in life or our boss or whatever that. Very few people take personal responsibility for their own success and happiness. So when people found out I had a faith life, they're like, well, you must blame God. And I think God's got a good sense of humor, which is probably where I get my sense of humor from. And so I used to joke with them. I'm like, oh, I don't think God got up on a Tuesday morning, checked his to-do list and said, Carrie Tucker cancer today. I don't think that happened at all. But like I said, I really believe God gave me the strength to go on. And I remember my doctor showed me my CAT scan at the time when I had my leg amputated and I had these tumors in my lungs. And I don't have any medical background, so I don't really know how to read a CAT scan, but I kind of know what should be there and shouldn't be there. And I had fluid all around the pleural spaces of the outside of my lungs. I had these big tumors inside my lungs. And I remember looking at my oncologist and saying, how was I alive? And he
Mm.
kind of smiled and shook his head. And he's like, I don't know. And what that said to me was, God's not done with me yet. When I die, how I
Yes.
die, where I die, way above my pay grade. So I don't spend a whole lot of time worrying about it right now.
Wow. I like what you said because I've had a couple of moments where I felt like you were saying in between, I call it just existing. You're
Yeah.
not living, you're not dying, you're just existing. And I remember having a moment when I said, God, if I have to just exist and live like this, could you just take me? Because I cannot live like this anymore. And I've had one of those moments. I've had more than one of those moments. I had a couple of those moments, but I never really, I can't say that I ever blamed God for anything.
Yeah.
If anything, I would question, why am I going through this so long? Or why does this keep happening to me? I ask questions, and I don't think God gets upset with us when we ask questions. He wants us to ask questions. He wants us to talk to him. And so I love that. How did your family, how were they able? Because you mentioned faith, family, and what was the last F? I'm sorry.
Friends.
Friends. How was your family and friends during that time? How were they able to make it through this?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of a funny story. When I had my leg amputated, my doctor wanted to put me on chemotherapy. And I asked him, I said, is it going to save my life? And he was like, probably not, but it might buy you some more time. And I was 8 years into this cancer journey. And, I was like, I don't really think I want to do that then. If the outcome is going to be the same, if I'm still going to die, I don't think I want to go through all that ugliness and pain of chemotherapy if the outcome is going to be the same. I said, but I'll go home and talk to my family about it. And it's just my wife and daughter and I. So I go home and I start telling them about what's going on. And my daughter's immediately, oh, we need a family meeting. I'm like, family meeting? There's 3 of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that, So we sit around the kitchen table and we individually talk about how we all feel about me having chemotherapy. And then when we're finished with that, my daughter's like, all right, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy? And my wife and daughter raised their hand. And I'm like, wait a minute. Am I getting outvoted for something that I don't want to do? But I remember when I was back in the police academy, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people we love the most to class. And as we were learning different techniques to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph because he reasoned you will fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself. So I ended up taking chemotherapy, not because I wanted to, but because I love my family more than I love myself. And in hindsight, it was the right thing to do because it was a bridge that got me to where I am now. And I've been on a clinical trial drug that has pretty much kept my cancer stable for the last couple of years.
Wow, that says a lot about how powerful your family is and having them have your back.
Yeah.
And I think it also, they can see things differently than you can when you're actually in it. That's why it's good to talk to your family, talk to friends, because they see things differently. I think that is amazing. So now that you're better, and moving forward, what are you moving forward into? What are you doing now? I have all this stuff. I'm sure, is it difficult to get around, or you just like, I have to do what I have to do. Let me just do it.
Kind of the latter. It is difficult to get around. I was able a little over a year ago to use my prosthetic leg to walk my daughter down the aisle, which that was a huge goal for me. But it's hard for me to use my prosthetic leg because falling is not an option. When you're 6'8", falling is, you get hurt when you fall from that distance and things like that. So I am pretty much in a wheelchair. Mostly I use a walker, because I still have one good leg. It still functions and things like that. So, I kind of hop around with a walker. It's not sexy or anything like that, but hey, it gets the job done, and things like that. But yeah, so I mean, I do what I need to do to get where I am. I mean, my wife, takes me to treatment every 3 weeks. I am at the hospital for treatment for the tumors in my lungs. And, she's got to put my wheelchair in the car and take it out and all that kind of stuff. So, there are things that I couldn't do by myself. And I think I've realized just how incredibly dependent I am on other people. And maybe that's a lesson God wants me to learn. Maybe that's, I was very independent. I was very self-assured. I was very confident. And now I'm like, I can't make my own meals. I can't, make the bed. I can't do the laundry. I can't do a lot of the things that I used to do prior to me having this. And while that, I'm very fortunate and very lucky, at the same time, I kind of feel at times that I am a burden, on my family. And would it be better if I wasn't here and things like that? And the answer is no. I mean, it's important for me to be here. When I go will be on God's time, not my time. And that's another thing I think you and I both understand that we want things to happen on our time. The
Hmm.
world revolves on God's time, and a lot of
Absolutely.
times God's time and our time, they're not the
They
same
do
thing.
not line up. That is
They
so
do not.
true. That is so true. But something you just said, I felt this and I'm like, okay, and I'm learning listening to you. I think God wants us to get to a point where we have to depend upon Him, just like you have to depend upon your wife. And if we don't go through things, we never get to that point because we feel like we can do it. We don't need God. And God is like, yeah, you do need me. I've seen your life. I've heard the decisions you made. I've seen the things you've done. You need me, to help. So, what advice would you give anyone that's going through, whether it's medical, physical, mental, any kind of like traumatic experiences in their life? What advice, because like I said, you've been through a lot, I've been through a lot, but what advice would you give someone? Maybe there's a listener who just got a bad report from the doctor, or, or actually is going through those stages of existing, what advice would you give them?
That's a great question, and I could probably spend the next 4 hours giving you pieces of advice that I've learned along the way. But I'll give you a couple things. I think number one, we all have bad days. I mean, I don't want anybody listening to us think that, I'm sitting here with an S on my chest and a cape and I fly around with magical powers. I don't. I have bad days. There are days when I cry. There are days I feel down. There are days I feel sorry for myself. I'm a human being. But when those days happen, I remember two stories that I heard. The first one was about an experiment that a professor did at Johns Hopkins University back in the 1950s. It was a very simple experiment. He took rats, and hang with me here because I am going to talk about rats. He took rats and he put them in a tank of water that was over their head. And he wanted to see how long the rats could tread water before they would sink. And the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as the rats were getting ready to drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And then he put the exact same rats in that exact same tank of water a second time. And the second time around, those rats, on average, treaded water for 60 hours. Now,
Oh,
think about
wow.
that. The first time, 15 minutes, you're just not going to fail. You're going to die. Your life is going to be over. The second time around, 60 minutes, which taught me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives. We have to
Yes.
believe, maybe not today, maybe not next month, maybe not even next year, but at some point in time, our life will get better. And the second thing is just how much more our physical bodies can handle than we ever thought they could. I mean, I think everybody has a breaking point, but
Hmm.
that breaking point is so much further down the road than we ever give ourselves credit for. And the second story that kind of dovetails with that is that my wife works with a young man who's a former Navy SEAL, some of the toughest men in the military. And on my off weeks, he calls me just to check up on me and see how I'm doing. And sometimes we talk about what the SEALs call their 40% rule, which basically says that if you're at the end, if you can't go on, if you just are at the end of your rope, you're only at 40% of your maximum, and you still have
Wow.
another 60% left in reserve to give to yourself. So whenever those people who are out there listening to us think, you know what, I just can't go on, I can't do it anymore, remember, you have so much more to give to yourself, and just find a way to keep moving forward.
You know what? I love this because as I told you at the very beginning when we were chatting before we started recording, I just had a rough morning. I had a lot of things that was going on, but I pushed my way through because I knew I had this, and I prayed before we got on. And I love how God does things because He knew that I needed to hear this. I needed to push because sometimes you just get so full and you get so tired. But God would never put more on us than we can handle. He knows how much that we can take. He will, and he may get us right there, and we're like, oh, and he was like, got a little bit more. So what he does for me, he puts me to sleep. Let me go to sleep. Just knock me out. Let me go to sleep. When I wake up in the morning, I'm ready to go. So I'm like, when I get there, I rest, I sleep because I can't function anymore. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to deal with it. So just knock me out. As I say, I'll put a close to the day. I will end the day anytime. The sun doesn't have to go down for me to end the day. It could be 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I will shut the blinds, get in the bed and just close the day. This day is over, done. I'm not doing anything else in it. And then I wake up the next morning, open the blinds. Okay, I'm back. I'm ready. Let's do this. Oh, that is some great advice. So, on my podcast, you know that at the end, I always share my thoughts, and then I ask questions. So we're going to answer those questions at the end of that particular episode. The first one is: has there been another time in your life when you didn't listen to your body? What happened? So since all of this happened, has there been another time where you just kind of pushed it off, or did you learn your lesson?
No, I didn't learn my lesson. I'm a stubborn man at times, and you, I am treated at the hospital, as I mentioned, every 3 weeks with this clinical trial drug, and it beats me up pretty bad. And I shake, I violently throw up, I have a headache, I have a fever, I have all kinds of ugly side effects from this drug. But I'm also the type of person that unfortunately hypersensitivity to vaccines. So my flu shot, my COVID booster, and things like that. I just got out of the hospital after spending 4 days in the hospital, having gotten my COVID booster, and it
Oh,
put me in the
wow.
hospital. So, but I'm the person like, no, I don't want to go to the hospital. I don't. I had a blood pressure of like 70/50. I had a heart rate of 140. I had a temperature of 104 degrees. My O2 sats were below 90. I mean, I literally thought I was going to die, but I was too stubborn to go to the hospital. Finally, my wife ended up calling the squad, and they took me to the hospital. So yes, there has been a time when I haven't learned my lesson, and probably will not learn it. Who knows? Maybe I'll learn it someday.
That is hilarious. You're like, I'm about to die, but I still don't want to go.
I'm
And
not. I don't like the hospital. No.
I'm gonna answer this question. And to be honest, yes, there has been times where I didn't listen, and I kept having a headache. My head was just pounding, and whenever I get a headache or something like this, I always try to be a doctor myself.
Sure.
And okay, is it my sinuses? What's going on? Am I stressed? What's going on? Whatever. Well, it ended up being that my blood pressure was so high because I helped take care of my mom. And my blood pressure was so high and it was showing through my headache. And I pushed it off. I really did until I got to the point where I couldn't handle it anymore. And I was at my mom's house and I had taken out her blood pressure thing and I took my blood pressure and I said, oh, that could be why
Oops.
you have a headache because your blood pressure is so high, But I will be honest, I did not go to the doctor. But what I did was I did some things to help bring my blood pressure down. So I knew because of helping take care of my mom, the doctor tells my mom different things. And I'm like, well, it can't be just for her. It must be, for other people can use
Sure.
this advice. And that's exactly what I did. So honestly, with this, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that, that we go through a lot, but there are times when we still don't listen to our bodies.
Yeah.
Okay. So the second question: did you learn anything from the experience? The one you just went through, did you learn anything from it?
Truthfully, yes, I learned. Will I put that learning into practice? Maybe, maybe not.
I don't
Full
know.
disclosure, being honest, maybe, maybe not. I don't know.
I was gonna say that's a man's thing, but I don't think.
That's
I think
it
it's just
is. You're absolutely
everybody.
right.
I don't know, but for me, I did. I learned. I pay attention now, um, because I look at my mother and I look at some other people. We've had quite a few deaths in our family the last year or so, And so when something goes on, I try to pay attention and I try to make an attempt to do better. So I do learn from it because, and it's probably more so out of fear. Like, you better take care of yourself because you're going to be gone. And there's things that you need to do, God wants you to do. So, so I think that I do. I
Can
learned
I
from them.
follow up on that if
Okay.
it's okay with you?
Yes, sure, sure.
So I had a nurse recently ask me what it was like to have my foot amputated and to have my leg amputated. And I was honest with her. I told her it hasn't been easy and I'm still learning how to walk again. But what I did tell her was this, and this is definitely something I've learned from listening to my body, is that cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and
Oh,
it can't
that's
touch my
good.
soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Miss V. That's who everybody who's listening.
Yes.
So we spend all this time worrying about our body, and we should, don't get me wrong, but worrying about what your hairstyle is or what kind of clothes you're wearing or anything like that is not nearly as important as working on your heart, your mind, and your soul, because that's who we really are.
Oh, that was good. Oh, I like that. Thank you, Terry. That was a great point to end on. That is so, and that's who we are, because when we leave this earth, these bodies are going to be just here, but we're going to be, well, for those of us who believe. If you don't, I'm sorry, just mute this part. But for those of who are believers and all that, that's what's going to be the most important thing. It's our minds, body, and our spirit. Oh, that's so, love, 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 love. So, Terry, I know that you have a book and I know that you're a speaker. So, please tell us where we can find the book. Tell us, what's going on so that my listeners will know how to get in touch, just in case, someone may reach out and just need to talk to you because they're going through a difficult time.
Absolutely. My book is called Sustainable Excellence, the 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. You can get it anywhere you can get a book online, Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, Apple iBooks. I have a blog called motivationalcheck.com. And every day I put up a thought for the day. And with that thought usually comes a question about maybe how you could incorporate that in your life. On Mondays, I put up the Monday morning motivational message, which is a video or a story that I think will help people. I have recommendations for other books to read, videos to watch, but you can leave me a message at motivationalcheck.com.
That is perfect. That is perfect. And I think that anyone who's struggling, and this particular episode is airing. I mean, we're videotaping it right now during the holidays, but even after the holidays, people have a rough time. The new year comes in and, they have a rough time. So I think that's a great resource that somebody can reach out, somebody can look at and say, okay, this man right here, I heard him on Miss Vita Storyteller podcast, and he's still here and he's still doing. Let me click on and learn about him. So please, you guys, don't suffer in silence. Get the help that you need. I will make sure all of his information is in the description. So if you need to reach out to him and go out and buy his book, whatever you need to do to keep moving forward. Thank you so much, Terry, for being here. I'm telling you, this was a pure joy. I knew it. I knew you were going to bring it, and you did just that.
Well, thank you, Miss V. I always say it's nice people like you that allow me to come on and have a conversation with them. And if that conversation makes a positive difference in just one person's life, today's been a good day.
Absolutely.